The concept of a mixtape is one that you're likely familiar with, although it was a number of years ago. And I certainly remember the time every Sunday afternoon as America's Top 40 would come on, hosted by Casey Kasem. Most of us as teenagers would be poised and ready with one finger on play and one finger on record, ready to capture our favorite songs so that we could play them again and again over and over throughout the week. Well, that's the idea that we're going to be bringing to you, as several of us from our team are going to be sharing our favorite psalms. Because in actuality, the Hebrew word for this collection of writings is Tehillim, which means praise songs. Later, it's translated into Greek from the Septuagint, and it is given the Greek name psalmoi. And from that, we get our English word psalms. Some are poems, some are hymns. In a variety of kinds of psalms, many are meant to be sung to a stringed instrument. Now, we know that David was very gifted at this, and many of our psalms are attributed to David, written at a variety of points of his personal journey, which had significant ups and significant downs. Thus, the reason that we can relate to the psalms and the variety of moods that they correlate to within us. The psalm that we're going to look at today is Psalm 27. It actually has been a personal favorite of mine for a variety of reasons and in a variety of seasons of my life. As a teenager, it was my constant read before every basketball game that I ever played. I accepted Christ as a teenager, and my particular ability to play basketball was my absolute passion. I sincerely viewed it as a desire to use my abilities to glorify God in any way that I could. And yet, as most teenagers do, I struggled with confidence. So prior to every game, I read Psalms 27 and spent time praying to God and that He would receive glory from every endeavor that I had, especially in the competitive game of basketball. Now, certainly, we did not win every game, but I continually put myself in the shoes of David, fleeing his own adversaries and looking to God to give him the strength to defeat them. Now, as I grew older, those adversaries changed. Many of them became issues in my own life that I was struggling with. But Psalms 27 was always something that I continually went back to and read when I needed God's sense of presence and confidence in my life. Psalms 27 begins in a beautiful way. The Lord is my light and my salvation, so why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger. Why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me and my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I am attacked, I will remain confident. Now, Warren Wiersbe, a Bible teacher, states that the first reference to God in this passage is one of the first references that we have as God as our light. Now, the New Testament authors pick up on this, and Jesus also reflects back on this idea in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14, he says, "You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden." Now, there is an implication, again, of the previous series that we just finished up called Comforting Chaos, that God is our light as we traverse through the valley of the shadow of death. And the message is timely for us right now. When God is our light, why should we be afraid? If He is our fortress and our protection, why should I tremble? You see, the goal of all of this we find at the end of verse 3, which says, I will remain confident. That's what God wants for us, even in this time, is confidence. Why? Not because I have the strength to endure this virus or the unemployment that it might cause, but because God stands with me, in my defense, sheltering me from anything that could do me harm. His sovereignty is in control, and of this I can be confident. So, then it bears this question for us. Where do we find our confidence? Where do others find their confidence? That's why it's so pertinent in this situation. There is very little confidence today in our finances, in our leaders, or even in our health. Almost every source of our cultural confidence has been shaken to the core by what? A microscopic virus. Not a visible, powerful weapon of war, not a political rival, not a new emerging empire, but a virus. But that's the reason that the truth of what David wrote some 3,000 years ago still relates to us today. We can depend upon God. He does not change. He is still our light in any darkness and our fortress to withstand any onslaught of any enemy. David goes on to say, the one thing I ask of the Lord, the thing I seek most, is to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. For he will conceal me there when the troubles come. He will hide me in his sanctuary. He will place me out of reach on a high rock. For me, this speaks directly to my personal walk with Jesus and where it is today. Do I desire his presence, or would I rather shield some of my actions from him? The real question is this: do I delight in him? I want you to ask yourself that same question today. Do you delight in the Lord? Now, some would think that David is referring in this passage to the place of the tabernacle, the temporary tent of meeting that would house the Ark of the Covenant. You see, now David would be the one who would get all the supplies ready to build the temple, but he was not allowed to build the temple. That was reserved for his son, Solomon. But David got everything ready to build the temple. Yet I really believe that this passage is relating not just to the tabernacle, the place where David would go to sense God's presence, but it's instead referring to anywhere that he experienced the active presence of God. Sometimes this would be in an open field of battle, like David did with Goliath. Sometimes it would be a solitary cave. And certainly it would be in that tabernacle near the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence of God. And yet it begs the question for us: where do we go when we desire the presence of God? Some of you love to be at church, and that's been difficult during this time. I love to sit outside among the trees. Sometimes it's on the shore of a lake. Other times, when I'm on vacation, it might be near an ocean to see and experience the immenseness of God, and yet his personal desire to have my heart. Yet in the hundreds of times that I've read this passage, one phrase always eluded me. I just didn't get it. Verse 9 says, "Do not turn your back on me. Do not reject your servant in anger. You have always been my helper. Don't leave me now. Don't abandon me, O God of my salvation." And then verse 10, "Even if my mother and father abandon me, the Lord will hold me close." Now, as I would read this as a teenager, I understood the prayer of a desire of a sense to have my heart close to God's. But my confusion would always come in verse 10. Even if my mother and father abandoned me, the Lord would hold me close? I didn't get it. I wondered, what kind of parents did David have? Because my parents were some of the greatest examples of God's loving provision for me. They always made sure that my needs were met. They exemplified God's loving care, even his understanding discipline. They were my biggest cheerleaders. I just didn't understand this part of the passage. But in my 40s, I got it. My parents would never intentionally abandon me. Now, I know that for some of you, that was not your experience. Your parents were not great role models of God's provision. But even though my parents did not desire to leave me, in their deaths, I felt abandoned. I got it. And I came to the stark realization, listen, I always want to be here for Jennifer, for my daughters, for their families. I want to be here as a confidant to many of you and as a shepherd to so many of you. But someday, I won't be. But even then, God will still be the one whose strength never leaves, never abandons us. And I love the way this passage concludes. Verse 13 and 14. Yet I am confident I will see the Lord's goodness while I am here in the land of the living. Wait patiently for the Lord. Be brave and courageous. Yes, wait patiently for the Lord. Here again is this central theme of God's confidence that's always available to us. But it's available to us in the strangest of places. The world would think that it rests in beauty and fame, wealth and power. But God's confidence is available when we are waiting on Him, patiently waiting. I know we're not good at this. I certainly am not good at this. But David says it twice so that we won't miss it. Wait for the Lord. Do you hear this clear instruction at a time when we so desperately need it? Don't rush ahead. Hey, and when this is over, don't go back to that sense of dependence on all the things that the culture tries to convince you that will give you confidence. No, wait on the Lord. Place your dependence on Him. You know, it is still as relevant for me today at 51 as it was when I was 15. Thanks be to God for the timelessness of His Word.
Guys, if you've been enjoying these videos, I want to ask that you like this video, maybe leave a comment and subscribe. But most importantly, hit that bell for notifications for a new refuel.